Shalom. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karen Sethill, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here to this evening's conversation between Anthony Julius and Wendy Singer, from the first Jew to the Jews of today, ancient stories, modern dilemmas. If I were to read out both our speakers' biographies, there would be no time for us to hear them, so I will be brief. Anthony Julius is deputy chairman at the law firm Mishkon Derea. He holds the chair in law and arts in the Faculty of Laws at University College London and teaches courses on Shakespeare, Kant, and William Empson. He is also a visiting professor at the University of Haifa. Anthony has served as the legal advisor in many high-profile cases, including representing Deborah Lipstadt in her landmark libel defense against Holocaust denier David Irving. Through his role as chair of the Intracommunal Professors Group, he is an important voice in the campaign to counter anti-Semitism at universities in the UK. Anthony's many publications encompass art crimes, Dickens, love poetry, and the art of advocacy, the rebirth of anti-Semitism in the 21st century, psychoanalysis, and free speech. His acclaimed books include Trials of the Diaspora, A History of Anti-Semitism in England, Transgressions, The Offences of Art, and most recently, Abraham, the First Jew. Indeed, the rich and broad canvas of Anthony's work meant that we spent quite some time considering the appropriate name for this evening's event, finally settling for this modest title, spanning all of Jewish life and debate from Abraham until today. No pressure. Anthony, when you first visited the library in 2022, there was an immediate connection. And indeed, when you settled down to work in the Sholem collection yesterday, it was clear that this is your natural habitat. We are very appreciative that you have given us so much of your precious time this week, and especially for this event tonight. Tomorrow afternoon, we will have another sold-out event with Anthony on his latest book, Abraham, the First Jew. Wendy Singer is a huge friend and advocate for the National Library and a much-valued senior advisor to the NLI. She was the founding executive director of Startup Nation Central, connecting Israeli technologies with governments and corporates around the world. Wendy now serves as a strategic advisor to select Israeli startups. She lectures widely on Israeli innovation post-October 7th. Her lectures have also focused on the remarkable resilience of Israeli society. Before joining Israel's tech scene, Wendy spent a decade on Capitol Hill and 16 years as head of AIPAC's office in Israel. She sits on the board of the Shalom Hartman Institute and the Russell Berry Foundation. So Wendy also brings an immense range of experience to this conversation. This is a really wonderful opportunity for the library, helping us realize our aim to be a place of open dialogue and debate. I would also like to sincerely thank Sally Berkovich and the Rothschild Foundation Hadajiv Europe for all their support and for making this event possible. And many thanks to you, our audience, for joining us this evening. Anthony and Wendy will be in conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we will open up the floor to your questions. Thank you.
Karen, thank you very much, and welcome. Erev Tov L'Kulchem. Thank you for joining us. Anthony, I feel like we've finally given you some weather today that you're more comfortable with. So, you recently came out with this book. Doesn't hurt to do a little promo for the book, Abraham, the First Jew. And in it, you brilliantly map out the two different lives of Abraham and really make the case against Abraham not as a unified personality. So if I'm going to do a riff off the title of our conversation this evening, from the first Jew to today's Jew, I'm going to ask you to go with me on a kind of a tour of some of the dilemmas of Jews today around the world. I'm going to start with my lunch this past Shabbat at the home of friends, and we were sitting around the table, and one of the people at this lunch shared with us that she's an academic. It's Professor Shira Wolosky from Hebrew University, that she was all set to do a teaching fellowship at the University of Pisa in October last month. And in late August, she gets a letter from her contact, the professor of literature at University of Pisa, which says, informing Shira that the Senate of the University of Pisa has voted to suspend all framework agreements with Israeli universities. Now, there was some back and forth, and Shira asked whether this could be rescheduled, whether there was any room for conversation. A lot of back and forth. The punchline is no. In fact, another friend at the same lunch leaned over and said, well, when does that red light become a green light? And I feel in this story, it holds a lot of the topics that you've been thinking and writing about in one anecdote. And I'm asking you, this one story, and I understand there's over 1,000 such stories of Israeli academics, is this anti-Zionism at the University of Pisa, or is it good old-fashioned anti-Semitism? And in our current landscape, do these distinctions matter?
So let me answer that, but let me first thank Karen, who I can't see, but thank you, Karen, for that very warm introduction. You're right, I was sitting in the Gershom Scholem research room, just working but getting up from time to time to wander through his books and see the dedications of the books to him. And I was also looking for some marginalia, as I thought it would be interesting to see what his comments were on the books I was pulling out. Am I not audible? Is that better? Sorry, I tend to speak quite low. Anyway, it was a most wonderful experience, and in one life, I would just move in here, I think.
That would be okay.
Surrounded by books, writing one's own book in congenial company, it's kind of heaven, isn't it? So this is awful, this story about your friend, and it's, as you say, it's not uncommon now. I don't find these distinctions really between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism very illuminating for a few reasons. One reason is that anti-Zionism is no more a single thing than anti-Semitism is. In 150 years ago, the only anti-Zionists were Jews who made the decision either to commit themselves to the revolution if they were in the East, or commit themselves to a version of assimilation if they were in the West. Anti-Zionism of the kind that we were addressing in the last decades of the last century, and then through to the first decades of this century, was essentially incubated in the Soviet Union, and then became an instrument of state policy in Poland in the 1960s. And it then acquired greater purchase following the collapse of the Soviet Union as the disappointed left found in the collapse of the socialist enterprise, found more local causes to support, and hostility to Israel and the Zionist project became one of those favored causes. I mean, that's a kind of very shorthand account. Anti-Semitism the term anti-Semitism is the invention of an anti-Semite, a man called Marr, who dreamt it up in the 1870s in Germany because he felt that the mere Jew hatred lacked ideological dignity next to the other ideological positions that people were taking: liberalism, Marxism, socialism, and so on. So he invented anti-Semitism to emphasize the racial component, or the pseudo-racial component, but also to acquire the credentials of a thinker, of an ideologue, rather than somebody who had just rather nasty views about Jews. I think the term anti-Semitism is no longer functional. In the Jewish world, we only reluctantly accepted the term. If you look at Jewish encyclopedias at the end of the 19th century, anti-Semitism is still being referred to in quotation marks as the neologism of Ma. So my long answer to your merely opening question tonight, is that we should probably jettison both anti-Semitism as a term and anti-Zionism as a term, and instead talk about simple Jew hatred.
And that covers everything.
And I think obviously then there are nuances and qualifications, but these essentially scholastic debates about whether a form of hatred has the characteristics of oneism or another, it leads nowhere.
Okay, I want to go a little bit further down into that black hole of anti-Semitism, but I'm promising everyone here with us tonight that will not be the sole topic that we're going to be covering. It's just that you have such a vast body of writings and things that you've discussed in that arena. When we met on Zoom last week, you talked about this broad sweep of anti-Semitism over thousands of years, and this sense that we've been living in a miraculous period since 1948. It reminded me, a few months into the war, I went to our neighborhood makolet, like our little neighborhood store, to pick up some groceries. It was a Friday morning, and I was standing there reading, looking at the headlines, and it was one of those very horrible days with terrible loss, and the headlines loss of Israeli soldiers and the hostages and the news from the US and Europe. It was just one of those bad days. And a friend of mine came along and said, I see the look on your face. Let's just admit we've had 75 golden years. And since 1948, it's been a golden age for Jews, for the West, for liberal democracies in Europe, in Western Europe. I remember in 1991, I was a young Senate staffer, and there was, this sense that the West had won. Some people in this room may remember the Francis Fukuyama article about the end of history. And then we have where we are today. And I just want to ask whether we're seeing just a untethering of liberal democratic ideals. And how has the last 2 years changed your view on this?
So you don't believe in short questions that
Gender shorthand.
elicit brief answers. So I'm not even going to feel guilty now about giving a slightly longer answer. So just, if that's okay, just unpacking the question. First of all, I don't think that anti-Semitism is one thing, and I don't think it's been continuously with us. I think there have been periods of Jew hatred, which is what I'm going to say now, and it is in the nature of Jew hatred that it has a kind of parasitic existence. It attaches itself to political or religious beliefs and contaminates them. So there's an anti-Semitism of the left, an anti-Semitism of the right. There's a capitalist anti-Semitism, a communist anti-Semitism, Christian anti-Semitism, Muslim anti-Semitism, and so on. It always has a kind of adjectival quality to it, qualifying socialist, conservative, liberal, and so on, more general positions. The only time that the adjective became a noun was in Nazism during the Shoah. The ambition to eliminate all the Jews in the world became the ideology of Nazism, which was essentially no greater than that eliminationist ambition. So the question of where we are now, I don't frame it as have we reverted after 70 years to the norm that characterized the millennia before 1945. Instead, I ask the question, where precisely are we now, independently of whether it marks a return? And then I ask the question, what is the character of the break with what's gone before? Now, it's true that there is a break. And it may be that it's a bit like a vase that breaks slowly and then quickly. There's a chip, there's a crack, and that happens over a period. And then there's a final chip or a crack, and it doesn't have to be the biggest one, and then the vase falls to pieces. I think the vase of Jewish safety fell to pieces on the 7th October. And I don't think it's going to be put back together. If there is going to be, and I believe there is, if there is going to be a collective Jewish existence in which we can thrive, then it's going to be a different kind of vase. And that different kind of vase means a different kind of relationship between Israel and the diaspora, a different kind of relationship within the diaspora between Jews and state institutions, and perhaps for the generation of our children and our grandchildren, a different sense of what it is to be Jewish. And I think these are new and emerging phenomena which are best analyzed in terms other than Jew hatred. One of the problems about anti-Semitism is that it's a massive distorter and distractor in Jewish life and Jewish thinking. It means that we can't actually attend to our own concerns, which includes our concern for our own people. We constantly feel we're being overheard, we mustn't give ammunition to the enemy and all the rest of it. So it causes us to remain silent when we should speak, it causes us to say some things when we should say other things. I've been inspired by the great Ben Gurion observation, and I've tried to apply it or give it a different content, but the formulation was genius and also absurd. It was at the time of the White Paper and the war against the Nazis. Ben Gurion said, "We will fight the White Paper as if there was no war, and we will fight the war as if there was no White Paper." And I feel that what we should do is we should talk in the Jewish world about our future as if there were no anti-Semites. And we should address anti-Semites as if there was no disunity in the Jewish world.
Very strong, very strong. So then you have this chapter in your life, which I'm going to call the Deborah Lipstadt trial. I know really it's Irving versus Lipstadt, and you led the legal team on behalf of Lipstadt. And we know the punchline, we know the verdict, which is that David Irving lost completely. But I'd be curious to hear what you think the story of that case represented and whether it foreshadowed some of the threats that we're seeing today on the right. You've probably been following all these stories from Washington and Tucker Carlson and Fuentes and they're just, it's endless. So start with the trial and what did it tell us about where we are now?
So being involved in that case was one of the great honors of my life. And it was a necessary piece of work because this despicable David Irving character came after Deborah, and she had to be defended. And we defended her, and that was that, as far as that threat was concerned. But it was only ever one threat. It didn't dispatch anti-Semitism. Of course, it didn't even dispatch Holocaust denial. I had a sense throughout the case, which was 2-3 years in the making, and then the trial itself lasted, I think, 3 months. But I periodically thought about the case as if I was living in a village on the edge of a jungle with red ant colonies all around the village.
Red ant?
Red ant colonies all around the village. And I thought every morning one has to get up and kill the encroaching red ants in order to lead a decent communal existence that day, knowing that the next morning one would have to do the same thing. And my sense of Irving was that he was just a red ant, and that no greater significance should be attached to the labor of dispatching him than any other red ant on any other day, so to speak, of Jewish life. So I'm not surprised that we should be dealing with later generations of David Irving's pseudo intellectuals of the right who think it's entertaining to get a rise out of Jews.
So you use that as a tool, and I know there's a whole field today and a lot of philanthropists and organizations that are calling into this legal warfare to take on some of our most ominous enemies and terrorists. Do you have any frameworks that you can suggest for when things cross a line in the public space today?
Well, I'm a litigator. I've been a lawyer for over 40 years, yes. But I don't think that, law is an answer in certain cases, but it comes with disadvantages. If one uses law as a way of combating anti-Semitism, it always comes at a price, and there are often disadvantages. The price is that it tends to make Jews themselves passive spectators in the process of combating anti-Semitism. In effect, the job of combating is subcontracted out to lawyers, and then everyone waits for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years for the outcome. It has, in that sense, the effect of dulling the combative edge and the intellectual engagements of Jews generally. So I think that's just a bad thing, even when we lawyers are successful, but we're often not successful. And one of the bad lessons that the Lipset case taught is that when Jews go to law, they win. Mostly we don't win. And it's not because we have the poorer case. We don't win because in anti-Semitic times, anti-Semitism does not stop outside the courtroom.
Okay, that's pretty stark. I want to talk to you about Jewish students. I know you both teach at University College London, and you spend time with students. I believe you're chairing a certain committee that has to do with Jewish life on campus. What do you think, and we know the students are having a tough time post-October 7th. What do you think is the best way for the Jewish community to support Jewish students on campus, either where you are in the UK or North America?
So the committee that I set up with my good friend Daniel Hochhauser, who himself is a professor at UCL, we call ourselves the ICPG, the Intra-Communal Professorial Group, where we are a network of Jewish academics, over 100 of us now, at British universities. And our essential focus is in combating anti-Semitism in the university space and also championing the senior members of the universities, the Jewish university staff, who have their own challenges, which are not as broadly discussed as the challenges that the Jewish students have, but include, of course, boycott, which is how we began our conversation. That doesn't directly always affect UK academics in the way it does Israeli academics, but it does affect UK academics because when travel grants are applied for to go to spend time in Israeli universities, they tend to be refused, often on spurious grounds, safety, security, and all the rest of it. So boycott activity bites in the diaspora academics as well as Israeli academics. But to your question, I think that the situation is somewhat patchy in some of the, perhaps many of the universities in the UK. The kind of scenes that we saw of encampments and chants and all the rest of it, they're simply not known about. But in the universities where there were encampments, it's obviously extremely difficult for Jewish students to focus on their studies, to lead an ordinary university life. Overall, I think we're having some success in addressing that. Where I think the greater challenge lies for students, but also for academics, and in particular in the humanities, is addressing a kind of intellectual monoculture in a number of the faculties, where a received account of the history of Israel, the Zionist project, and all the rest of it acquires a kind of default villainous status, which it then becomes very difficult to kind of push against. And that's the work of a generation, and it requires a lot of investment in intellectual academic initiatives, because it's at the level of the academic publications, the journals, the books, the programs, and all the rest of it, that this struggle is going to be transacted.
So you could imagine turning that, when you said it's the work of a generation, you could imagine turning that into some kind of action plan for the community.
Yes, and the problem is that the big Jewish philanthropists, as generous as they are, struggle when they're aware. Mostly they don't struggle, it simply becomes the kind of default position against two disadvantages. The first is they all want to do their own thing. So there's very little coordination, and it's exasperating.
It's a systemic issue.
Yes, and secondly, because most of them have made their money and therefore been in a position to become philanthropists in business, they tend to have that rather kind of Philistine view of university life, the whole academic enterprise, as something which notwithstanding the usual politenesses, is ultimately not of the greatest respect. So the suspicion of universities and the egotistical pursuit of projects in the name of the individual philanthropist, these two problems are really bedeviling support for the university space, which is so short-sighted, because it's in this space that this generation and the next generation of Jews who wish to live as Jews outside of their homes and synagogues, this is where the battle is going to be pitched.
I'm going to say this, I can't really speak to the European side of the story, but I think that we did see some rare collaborative efforts in the philanthropic arena in the US, post-October 7th, where some of the larger foundations actually came together and really worked collaboratively on some of the biggest issues. Anyway, I want to go to a less comfortable aspect of the student story, which is some of the Jewish students are not in a very comfortable place in terms of how they think about Israel and talk about Israel. Do you engage with those students, and what do you say to them?
But I'm not sure I understand. I mean, I think I understand what you mean.
Jewish
about
students
comfortable.
who are
But you mean Jewish students who take up positions that are antagonistic to
Correct.
what used to be, but I think may well not be very much longer, mainstream Zionist positions.
correct. They're uncomfortable with
They're uncomfortable.
their connection to Israel, and they express it
Well,
as such.
Of course, but it's not just students. I mean, if I can speak in this frank way, it's not just students who were uncomfortable with the direction that Israel was taking before 7th October. And I'm referring to what was called the judicial coup as one example. And it's not just students who are concerned about certain aspects of post-7th October affairs. So we have to be super careful. And I just go back to my appropriation of the Ben Gurion formula. We have to be super careful not to take a position in which we say of young Jews who are simply trying to work through their own positions. And I mean, I would say it's true probably of all of us here. No one can say for certain that the position that they hold on anything is the position they're going to be holding the last minutes of their life. I mean, to some extent, even if it's to a limited extent, we have to at least allow for the possibility we're going to change our mind marginally. One would hope that was true.
Yes.
If you're a young person still working out what you think, one's going to be constantly trying one position, another position, testing it, often articulating it as if it's a final position, as if there could be no other position.
With the arrogance of youth.
Yes, which is never quite equal to the arrogance of age, but can be pretty tough. It's only the arrogance of age that regards youth's challenges as arrogance, of course. I mean, not you, of course, but I mean, just generally, not you or me. I would say find it irritating, but I think that let me say this hard thing. I think that my sense is certainly in Anglo Jewry that the centrality of Israel in the Jewish imagination has been somewhat dislodged as a result of not just the 7th October, but the months before the 7th October. It was no longer possible to align a politically liberal identity, and I mean liberal in the kind of small L sense, a commitment to the rule of law, a commitment to truth in the media, a commitment to democratic institutions, multicultural existence, equality, and all the rest of it. It was to align that with certain elements, certain tendencies in Israel. And that caused a kind of crisis in understanding, which is still working itself out. This is a crisis that needs to be lovingly healed, and it will take time. And if we fear to address it in a loving way, because thereby we worry that we'll be giving ammunition to our enemies, we will wound ourselves more deeply than any damage our enemies can actually do to us.
I like that term, lovingly healed, but it requires some interlocutors to be doing that. I just think this is a big space that needs attention. Before I turn to some happier topics, I'm still in our current dilemmas category. I can't help myself, but just to ask you, because I spent so many years on sort of in the U.S.-Israel relationship and involved with pro-Israel advocacy in Washington through AIPAC. If I look at the demographics in the UK or the demographics in France, you've got a growing Muslim population and a shrinking Jewish population. I think it's 100,000 in the UK.
No. It's over 200,000.
Over 200. So let's say France is 350,000 Jews. And so you have this sort of reversing trend in population growth. And how are the politicians or the leaders in countries like the UK and France going to stand up to to this craziness of what is being unleashed?
I have to say, I don't find it useful to think about Anglo-Jewish life as a matter of pitching Muslims against Jews.
Okay, that's
and
fair.
It doesn't
Yeah.
feel to me that that's where the argument is. Anglo-Jews live in pretty cold times, and they have challenges, and worse than challenges, from diverse elements in diverse communities. And in order to deal with those challenges in an effective way, it's very important that we shouldn't misunderstand the direction of travel that our antagonists are taking. So
You're not looking at it in terms of a political strength.
no,
is what you're-
I don't. Frankly, I mean, I only speak of England. It makes no sense to talk of a unified, growing Muslim population. The Muslim world is even more fissured, even more divided in national, sectarian, familial allegiances than the Jewish world. And I don't myself feel in some kind of Hollywood movie style that there is a so to speak a field of battle in which all the Jews are on one side of a clear line and the Muslims are on the other side.
Okay, that's fair. I would love to talk with you for a few minutes about this building that we're in, the National Library of Israel. I know that you have a special relationship with NLI that goes back many years. First of all, if you could just share just some thoughts about how your relationship started here and what this place does for you.
Well, libraries have always been an important place for me because it's the principal place in which you educate yourself. So and Israel is a very special place to me. So a library in Israel has a kind of in a kind of mathematical sense, it's twice as important. And this library, of all the libraries, is the most extraordinary. I really have to thank Sally Berkovich for introducing me to this kind of wonderful people who run the NLI. And what can I say about the place? If it wasn't,
How do you use it?
well, so I've only started using it this time. This is the first time that I've used it as a resource, and I spent yesterday part of the day in the research room, the Gershom Scholem room. And I don't want to become mystical about it all, but
Go ahead.
But I did have, but I did know there is something. I mean, obviously, one likes to think that provided that the place is warm and well connected with Wi-Fi, one can work anywhere.
And coffee.
That's
Yeah.
and good coffee, yes, yes, and the right quality of noise cancelling headphones. But actually, I think one sells short one's immediate milieu if one just talks about it in those material ways. And two things. First of all, I was sitting opposite a guy with a most magnificent beard and pairs, who was working on a one text, and I was sitting away from two other students, who were also working. The chap did not have a kippah. The woman was obviously not Jewish.
Usually with that story, you would have, and the woman had, 7 tattoos and 4 earrings.
No, she was not. She
Yeah.
was not. I think she was. She was not Jewish, so. But I was in Gershom Scholem's library, and that sense of living in a multicultural Israel, Gershom Scholem space, where I was free to study and free to roam, where all of us in the room, as I fancied anyway, were committed to one or other kind of intellectual inquiry, was just wonderfully elevating. And I will take that experience with me, and it will become the touchstone by which I judge every other library experience.
Oh, nice. Nice. My colleague, Dr. Raquel Euclides, who's the head of collections here, she spoke very eloquently at a panel recently where she talked about that exactly what you described at the library here, and she quoted Borges, who talked about the library as a space that holds many stories. And I think that what you just described is exactly that. And what people that come from all over the country and many other countries around the world find when they come here. What I want to ask you is two more questions. One is about the sort of the world moving onto artificial intelligence. I heard one person describe it as there's a new language around the globe, and it's called data. And it's not enough anymore just to digitize the books in a library, but it now has to be AI enabled. All these 4.2 million books have to be able to sit in an AI world. And I know there's been a lot of very interesting dialogue between the National Library of Israel and the UK National Library. I feel like the National Library of Israel is literally standing on a global stage at this point. And I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on why this needs to happen, how this needs to happen. In my mind, it's the next chapter for this 132-year-old organization.
So I am. So that I can't remember who his interlocutor was, but someone said to Trotsky in 1914, "Well, I've got other things on my mind. I'm not interested in the war." And Trotsky said, "Mr. So-and-so, you may not yourself be interested in the war, but I can assure you the war is interested in you." So I feel a bit like that about AI. I don't myself use it. I don't use it as a prompt. I don't use it as a research tool, but I can see that it's, so to speak, coming for me in the way in which it is for everybody else. How it impacts on my own thinking, my own work, is one very specific way and one more general way. The very specific way is that the book that I'm writing at the moment is a book about free speech. And one of the questions that I raise is this one, that if you look at the great champions, the great advocates of free speech, Spinoza, Milton, John Stuart Mill, they were all championing free speech at a time when the only speech around was human speech. With the advent of AI, most speech will be algorithmic speech, not human speech. Now, what does that mean for our understanding of free speech? What precisely are we championing when we champion free speech in an AI world? So that's something that I'm now thinking very carefully about. The second thing that's worrying me about AI is the impact on jobs, and in particular in the legal profession, because AI is now doing the work, or part of the work, of our younger lawyers. And what that means for the next generation of young lawyers is a matter of grave concern.
I hear you, especially all those apprentices you talked about at Michigan. And in terms of the free speech, there is a whole other conversation that we are very busy with here about trusted information and how to ensure that the sort of the rich, endless amount of content from here goes out into that AI world in a way that is good for next generations. I'm going to open it up. I want to just ask you one last question. So we're sitting here in a chilly evening, chilly Tuesday night in Jerusalem. The war, God willing, is winding down. You're still very busy with these important and difficult topics. What gives you hope?
Well, to live, I hope, is to live in a condition of hope. So I also console myself with a great credo of the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who was jailed by Mussolini and therefore free of all the compromises and worse of the Third International, the communist movement, in the first part of the 20th century. And he talked about a general orientation towards the world as involving two things: pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will.
Optimism
Of the will, yes. So, in other words, you think things are going to hell, but you behave as if there was a chance that you can fight through.
That's great. That's great. There's actually very. It's interesting. There's a program that opened up here. You may have heard about it. Really in the throes of the opening weeks of the war, called Ararat, about resilience. It was basically giving workshops for mental health leaders around Israel to come here and really sort of tap into some of that, exactly that resilience and that optimism of different characters in Jewish history that dealt with crisis and emerged resilient. So thank you for that. We're going to open it up for questions. Do we need to pass around a mic, or how are we doing this? Just put up your hand, okay, and hopefully I can see you. My one request, when you ask a question, please let us know who you are. Anyone? Okay. In the last row.
Is Qatar has had a 20-year lead in the universities internationally, pushing their agenda. Are we going to be able to catch up? Are we able to educate our children to be able to advocate for Israel before it's too late. And why did Israel, why did the Jews see what Qatar was doing and
So the answer is I don't know to the either question. I don't know whether it's going to be possible to reclaim university life so that it's available for Jews in a way which allows them to be, so to speak, equal academic citizens. And I don't know why the Jewish world was looking in other directions rather than addressing that. All that I can say is we are where we are, and we have to do the best that we can now, with that optimism of the will, notwithstanding the rational pessimism of the intellect, I think, that's required when contemplating the current situation.
Big question. Start from over here. Yeah, in third row.
You'd stand up and introduce yourself.
Yeah, okay. My name is David Gatlin, and lived there in Israel 48 years. But I think I'm the only one here who ever lived in the shadow of the lynching. Because I come from Atlanta, Georgia, and my father and his brother were chased and called Christ killers after Leo Frank had been led. And when I was growing up, my parents would not, when I had a car, would not let me drive to Marietta outside of Atlanta where Leo Frank was named. So I know a bit about anti-Semitism and I understand it. But my question is the following. You would look around the audience here. I don't know who was invited. I have no idea. I'm not going to tell you what the average age is, but it's not very low. It's not very low. So I can tell you that my grandchildren, 5 of whom were in the war, and my children too, were in all kinds of different significant positions, they don't have any problem, even now, of traveling around in the world because they don't see what all these anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, they don't think it's that important. They really don't. They won't let me talk to them about it. They avoid it. But what I'm wondering is, young people, we're older people. Whether some of us can affect things, I don't know. But what about these young people? What about the people here, young people who fight in the army? We had big demonstrations here and all that. They're traveling around the world.
So wait, what's your question?
The question is, how are we going to educate them? That's my question.
I think I understand the question, and and let me answer it this way. There is a real worry, and I think perhaps we share this worry, that our children and our grandchildren will think that this new cold atmosphere, let me put it like that, is normal, because it's the only atmosphere that they know. And while we older folk still live and have our capacities, maybe one of our jobs is to say it doesn't have to be like that because it wasn't always like that. So we can give a kind of witness to how things were once better and therefore how they could become better again.
Okay. Can you just introduce yourself?
My name is Martina. I I don't feel that it's not always been like that in my lifetime, which is probably slightly less than his gentleman's. I don't feel that now is any colder than when I grew up in Europe, and it was equally cold.
When we talk about our individual experiences, we're never going to report the same experience. It's not even a matter of disagreeing with each other. You report the temperature in your part of the world, I report the temperature in my part of the world, and there it is. We know a bit more than before this mutual reporting took place. Overall, I think the world has become a colder place for the Jews. That's my sense of things.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, my name's Avi Linden. I've also been here now on 50 years and originally from England. And I went through the Zionism and racism thing when I was at university and we fought against it there. But one of the things that I look at living here is that you tend to live in bars here and elsewhere as well. And that when we were running around demonstrating before the war broke out, my grandson, who'd come out with me as well, he was 10 years there, he'd be shouting Democratia, Democratia. And I would be shouting demography. And I think that one of the things that we've got to look at and address somehow is how we look at the different demographics within the Jewish world and the bubbles that people live in. And I'll just finalize this with one of the things from my personal experience. We live in Ramot, which is in the north of Jerusalem, which has changed demographically over the years since we moved there 40-something years ago. And the things that we see, now children see who don't live there now, are very, very different from those that are seen and talked about by the people I get on the bus with and go through Meir Sharim. And everybody is convinced that, their world is what they see, that there are these different demographics in England as well that Jewishly aren't even interacting with each other. And how can you see that playing off in terms of the multi-dimensional way we've got to deal with things in the future?
So let me answer that question in a very oblique way. I think we must have been at university at the same time, and we had the same taste in comedy, I think, from your T-shirt. So I'm teaching at the moment a course on Shakespeare, and we're in what's called the moot room, which is where the law students get to practice being advocates. And so I'm teaching on a raised platform above the students who are all in front of me. And I don't like it because I feel that teaching has a strong collaborative element. And if one's simply just kind of laying the law down in a way which kind of spatially is emphasized by one's superior standing, it just feels that it misrepresents the nature of the encounter. So this is what came into my mind when you asked the question, because I'm on this slightly raised platform here and I don't have any better idea than you do about how to answer the question. I could just as easily pose the question of you and listen to you and asked you what you thought. Now, all I know is that we will only begin to address these challenges if we start talking about them in an open and tolerant way.
Any other questions? Over here, sir.
Yeah, Philip Marcus. I graduated through University College London Law Faculty in 1971. I actually appeared in the moot court on the ground floor here in Ensley Street. Okay, that's my background. I want to go back to the issue of the academics who are expressing views which are contrary to Israel. Well, to be consistent, not espousing the lies that are being told. Jacob Herzog, the diplomat rabbi in 1970, said the problem with these Jewish academics is that they don't know enough about the Jewish, and they don't know enough about their Jewish identity. That's 55 years ago. And it appears that very little has changed. And I would suggest that if we're going to address these issues among the students of today, they have to be better educated, better understand the history of the Jewish people. The title of this talk was From the First Jew to the Jews of Today. I've only heard Abraham mentioned somewhat, shall we say, not. But I want to suggest that if we're going to have any hope for these students and these academics, we're going to have to make them understand what it means to be Jewish and what the relationship is between the people of Israel, the history of Israel, the land of Israel. And without that, they're simply going to be attacked without knowing why they're being attacked. They're identified as Jews, but they have no real understanding of what that involves.
So of course, and nothing you say is controversial. I mean, certainly not to me. But then let me say this: I think that I don't like framing the conflict as one of identity against counter-identity. I think that the people who take the position, for example, that Israel is a settler colonial state without legitimacy, which is in formulaic terms the received academic position in the universities. I don't think that the Jews and non-Jews who take this position are deficient in, certainly of the Jews, a Jewish identity. I just think they're wrong. And I feel entirely comfortable addressing them at the level of historical, political, scientific truth in a kind of universalist academic discourse. I don't feel it's necessary to invoke my Jewish identity, my understanding of what it is to be Jewish, to have those arguments, or to, in a fair playing field, to prevail in those arguments. I don't think as a Jewish world, I don't think we fully take seriously enough the fact that on all the major issues, we're just right, independently of our identity. So that's where I stand. I talk about the arrogance of age, but that is my position. I don't think that I don't believe that I believe that Israel is not a settler colonial state because I'm a Jew, because I have a very developed Jewish identity. I think that I take this position because I actually understand a bit about the way in which settler colonial societies form and how radically different a settler colonial society as Israel is. And that one could explain that to any intelligent person who's willing to listen and to learn. So I think that the answer is not here in strengthening Jewish identity, whatever that means, but rather in strengthening intellectual grasp of facts that are available to everybody.
I'm going to the first row.
My name is Maria Pauber. I came for Soviet Union in 91. You mentioned before. My question to you is what do you feel? And I do believe in this idea, but how do you...
We'll repeat the question.
between yourself, let's say, and the person who is, say, I don't dig you in anything.
You line about everything. You line about October 7th. There were no breaks. There was no violence.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. So just so that everyone over here, Maria is asking then when Anthony referred to the term lovingly heal as a way to engage with students that are not so comfortable with their connection to Israel, you're asking, well, how do you interact? How do you lovingly heal with people who are denying the events of October 7th?
You don't. You don't. You don't. I mean, there are people with whom it is possible to repair relations. There are people with whom, beyond that, it's possible to find common cause, common enterprise, fellow Jews, in particular, who come to these questions with their own understandings and views, as we all do. And then there are enemies. They're entirely different groups. And I very much regret if I gave the impression that I thought that a generally kind of irenic, loving posture towards the world at large was the position that I stood for.
Not the world at large, but fellow Jews.
Well, if a person, if one meets a Jew who wishes to find common cause in a Jewish enterprise, in the enterprise of being Jewish in the second, third, fourth decades of the 21st century, then each one owes the other the care of attempting to engage constructively. It doesn't work, it doesn't work.
One more, I will take two more questions before we close. Sir.
My name is Roman Kruger. I'd like to go to the first phrase in today's lecture and ask if you can give us a few insights into the psyche or identity of Abraham, the first Jew, and I could take away to tomorrow when I read the headlines. How will understanding Abraham help me understand tomorrow?
So I'm doing an event on, yes, so the question was, what is my understanding of the life of Abraham, what bearing does it have on today's dilemmas? Just to say that I'm speaking tomorrow about the book here at, I think, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and I'll be speaking just about the book. But in very, very kind of telegraphic form, what I propose in the book is that Abraham's life is best understood in two very distinct and in some ways antithetical parts. There's the Abraham of the Torah, the Abraham who has already been exiled from his place of birth, Ur Kasdim, and is given an instruction to go to Canaan. And he has a whole series of adventures, and essentially the terminal adventure is the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. That's the Abraham, the man of faith. But there's also the Abraham of the Midrash and of Maimonides, and that's the Abraham who is born into a polytheistic society and through the power of his own reasoning and his ability to detach himself from his milieu, thinks his way towards a conviction that there is only one God. And this is a conviction that he arrives at through the powers of his own reasoning. And when he arrives at this position, it is the journey, the process of inquiry and self-inquiry that moves and intoxicates him as much as his provisional conclusion. That Abraham, if you like, an Enlightenment Abraham, an Abraham who is ready to test every proposition, who is ready to detach himself from every received belief. That is an Abraham who also lives in Jewish life and Jewish thinking. And if we elevate that Abraham to equal standing with the second Abraham, the Abraham of the Torah rather than of the Midrash, the man of faith, we have a kind of tension, don't we, between a kind of person who is committed to questioning, challenging, interrogating, a kind of restless mind, if you like, the person in his or her study. And then you have another Abraham who is an Abraham of the community, who is committed to a relationship with God, which is his principal relationship, an Abraham, if you like, of the shul. And so what I suggest is that these two Abrahams represent the two elements, the constituent parts of Jewish existence, and have done ever since the first Jew. And we just oscillate, we lurch. There is no perfect synthesis between being skeptical and inquiring and challenging and essentially uncomfortable where we are, on the one hand, and bathing, if you like, in the harmony and the unity and the love of communal existence. And I think, framed in that way, Abraham's divided life is the divided life of every one of us.
But you should still read the book. Okay. There was one last question over here, sir.
My name is Lloyd Setfield. I'd like to ask you a question. You said we're writing the book on free speech. We'd like to know what actually you mean by free speech, because it seems to me we've never had so much free speech. There on the internet, the radio, the TV, the newspapers, camera. Is it not just a euphemism to saying free speech is just, but I don't want anybody to say that I don't agree with? Or, on the other hand, do you by free speech mean true speech? If you mean true speech, do you not feel that with the advent of AI, we have the actual ability to change the actual perceived reality? But to talk about free speech is rather a misnomer. That we're losing whatever it was. Just summarize that.
Yeah, the question is, what does it even mean to talk about free speech now? Is it a useful concept? And it's an important question, and I'm thinking about it. And the only answer I can give, the only response I can give, is a very provisional one. But if you look at the history of the use of the term free speech, it's clear that it has 2 points of origin. It has a point of origin in the confessional divisions, the religious divisions within Christendom in the 17th century, and in the political divisions in the 18th century in Europe. It was clear that it would not be possible to live in a society in which it was one was a minority, a member of a minority, unless one had some kind of freedom to live one's life as a member of that minority. The question of religious free speech, because here free speech means the freedom to worship in the way that you choose. And later, it was clear that it would not be possible for the majority to advance to any kind of position of equality unless they were able to speak freely politically, to organize themselves. And so free speech meant freedom to worship and freedom to, if you like, organize politically. Now, it didn't, when people talked about free speech, that's what they meant. But they didn't endlessly qualify the term free speech. They just talked about free speech. So now the question is, what does it mean when one talks about free speech now? And it requires thinking from the very root of the concept and asking the question, does it have any utility, any remaining utility now? My working hypothesis is that it does, but it requires a radical revision of the understanding of the term.
Anthony, I want to thank you for traveling here to join us this evening. I think I would like to close, and you talked about what gives you hope, and I think you captured quite beautifully not just what gives you hope in a broader sense, but your connection to the National Library, and you really captured what you're seeing in the reading room when you're sitting there working. And as someone who spends time here, during the week, I feel like that table that you described with the Haredi and the different people from different communities, that there's a cross-section of Israeli society sitting at many of these tables and in the cafe and in the lobby and in the rooms in the education wing. And that gives me hope. I feel like there's one thing that people like you and all of your colleagues that come here from Europe, and obviously from people who visit from North America, that you feel in this space like you're part of something larger than just yourself. And I think that is a note to end on. I also want to thank Sally from Yara Nadiv and Karen from Gesher Europa from making this evening possible and for continuing to enrich our lives here in Jerusalem with all these wonderful connections to the European world and institutions. Toda rabba lachem, and have a good evening.